Este pequeño tubo salvó miles de vidas y dejó a los médicos alemanes completamente desconcertados durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Este pequeño tubo salvó miles de vidas y dejó a los médicos alemanes completamente desconcertados durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial.
Among the newest arrivals were several American prisoners captured during a fierce German counterattack. They had suffered devastating battlefield injuries, broken bones, deep shrapnel wounds, and severe abdominal trauma. These were exactly the kinds of injuries that usually fill the surgical station with cries of pain. But something was different. The Americans were remarkably calm. One soldier quietly struggled to light a cigarette despite an injured hand. Another asked for water while waiting for treatment. Others simply lay still, watching the German medical staff with steady expressions. For a physician who had spent years treating casualties on the Eastern Front, the silence was almost impossible to understand. He knew these injuries. He knew how much they should hurt. Yet these men had come directly from the battlefield. They had not reached a hospital. They had not been placed under anesthesia. Somehow, before arriving at his operating table, something had already changed their experience of pain. That question would become one of the most fascinating medical mysteries of the Second World War. What the German doctor could not see was that the answer had begun long before the prisoners entered his surgical station. Hidden behind every wounded American soldier stood an entire medical system designed to reach casualties within minutes of injury, a system unlike anything the German army possessed. But no one at Anzio understood that yet. If this story surprises you, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps preserve remarkable pieces of history like this and brings them to more people who appreciate the past. Only a few kilometers away, another physician was noticing the very same mystery from a completely different perspective. His name was Henry Beecher, a Harvard-trained anesthesiologist serving with the USA Army Medical Corps. Beecher had already treated hundreds of battlefield casualties in North Africa and Italy. He understood pain, anesthesia, and surgery better than almost anyone alive. Yet what he observed at Anzio challenged everything he believed. Beecher carefully studied 215 American soldiers who had suffered major combat wounds. Many had severe fractures, penetrating abdominal injuries, or extensive shrapnel damage, injuries that would normally require immediate and powerful pain relief. He asked every patient one simple question. Is your pain severe enough that you want medicine for it? The answer stunned him. Nearly 75% said no. These were not lightly wounded men. In civilian hospitals back in the United States, patients with comparable injuries almost always requested morphine as quickly as possible. Why was the battlefield producing the opposite result? Beecher refused to dismiss it as extraordinary courage alone. After the war, he published his landmark 1946 paper, Pain in Men Wounded in Battle, proposing that the meaning of an injury could dramatically influence how pain was experienced. For a civilian, a serious injury often meant uncertainty, disability, and fear. For many soldiers, however, being wounded also meant something else. It meant survival. It meant leaving the front line. It meant the possibility of going home. That emotional shift, Beecher believed, could lessen the perception of pain itself. His research transformed medical science and became one of the foundations of modern pain psychology. Yet even Beecher had overlooked something important. Every soldier he interviewed had already reached a hospital. They had already been rescued, stabilized, and transported from the battlefield. What happened during those critical first minutes after they were wounded remained largely invisible. And inside that forgotten window lay one of the greatest medical innovations of the Second World War. The Germans believed they were witnessing remarkable American endurance. In reality, they were seeing the first results of a revolutionary battlefield system that reached wounded soldiers almost immediately, often before a surgeon ever saw them. In the next part, we'll discover the small device that fit in a medic's pocket, the courageous men who carried it into combat, and why it forever changed the survival of wounded soldiers on the battlefield. What Henry Beecher never witnessed were the crucial moments between a soldier being wounded and arriving at the hospital. Those first few minutes often determined whether a man would survive, and whether he would endure unbearable pain. The United States Army had quietly transformed those moments into one of its greatest advantages. At the center of that transformation was an object so small it could fit in the palm of a hand. It was called the morphine syringe. Unlike a traditional syringe, the syringe was a lightweight collapsible metal tube with a needle attached to one end. Inside it was a carefully measured dose of morphine tartrate, ready to be administered without glass vials or complicated equipment. A trained medic could remove the cap, inject the medicine beneath the skin, and provide relief in less than a minute. Once the injection was complete, the empty syringe was pinned to the wounded soldier's collar. That simple gesture served an important purpose. Any medic or doctor who reached the casualty later could immediately see that morphine had already been given, preventing a dangerous second dose. It was a small detail, but it reflected careful planning and coordination throughout the American evacuation system. The syringe itself, however, was only part of the story. Someone still had to carry it through exploding artillery, machine gun fire, and collapsing front lines. That responsibility belonged to the company airmen, the soldiers every infantry unit simply called DOC. EE.UU American Rifle Company had trained medical airmen assigned directly to the platoons. Unlike physicians working at aid stations miles behind the front, these medics moved with the infantry itself. They were often only a few dozen yards from the fighting when casualties occurred. Armed only with medical equipment and protected under the Geneva Convention by the Red Cross emblem on their helmets and armbands, they carried no rifles. Their mission was simple but extraordinarily dangerous. When everyone else sought cover, they ran toward the wounded. Inside their medical bags were morphine syringes, sterile bandages, sulfa powder to reduce infection, tourniquets, and other life-saving supplies. Their goal was to stabilize a casualty within minutes, long before an ambulance or surgeon could arrive. This forward medical system gave wounded American soldiers an immediate chance that many armies of the era simply could not match. Its value became unmistakably clear on June 6, 1944. As dawn broke over Omaha Beach, landing craft opened their ramps into rough surf under intense German fire. Among the first Americans stepping into the water was Technical Sergeant Ray Lambert, a company aidman with the 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division. Lambert carried no rifle. Instead, his canvas medical bag held the tools that could keep wounded soldiers alive. Within moments of reaching the beach, casualties surrounded him. Under constant fire, he dragged injured men behind obstacles, applied tourniquets, dressed wounds, sprinkled sulfa powder to reduce infection, and administered morphine whenever it was needed. Again and again, he pinned empty syringes to uniforms before moving to the next patient. Then Lambert himself was wounded. A bullet tore into his leg, causing a severe injury. Rather than stopping, he calmly applied his own tourniquet, injected himself with a morphine syringe, pinned the empty tube to his collar exactly as he had done for countless others, and returned to treating wounded soldiers. Training had become instinct. Even after suffering additional injuries later that morning, Lambert continued rescuing men from the surf until his body could no longer respond. His actions were extraordinary, but they were not unique. Across Omaha Beach, dozens of American airmen performed the same duty. Many became casualties themselves while attempting to reach wounded infantrymen. They accepted enormous personal risk because every minute mattered. A quickly controlled wound, rapid pain relief, and early infection prevention often made the difference between life and death. This was the true strength of the American battlefield medical system. The morphine syringe was not simply a painkiller. It represented a promise that no wounded soldier would be left to face his injuries alone. Yet this raises another question. If American medics could reach casualties within minutes, what happened to wounded German soldiers on the very same battlefield? The answer reveals one of the greatest differences between the two armies, and helps explain why German doctors at Anzio could never fully understand what they were seeing. The difference between the American and German medical systems was not simply a matter of equipment. It reflected two completely different philosophies about battlefield care. When an American soldier was wounded, treatment often began within minutes. A nearby company aidman could administer morphine, clean the wound with sulfa powder, apply sterile bandages, and prepare the casualty for evacuation before serious complications developed. For many German soldiers, the experience was very different. German medical orderlies, known as Sanitäter, were highly dedicated and courageous, but their responsibilities were far more limited. They focused on stopping bleeding, applying bandages, splinting fractures, and carrying casualties to the rear. Powerful medications such as morphine were generally reserved for physicians stationed farther behind the front line. That meant pain relief often depended on how quickly a wounded soldier could reach a battalion aid station. Under heavy shelling, broken roads, or difficult terrain, that journey could take hours. The difference was measured not only in comfort, but often in survival. By the final years of the war, American planners understood that every minute after an injury mattered. Instead of waiting for the wounded to reach the hospital, they pushed medical care as close to the battlefield as possible. The morphine syringe was only the beginning. Another life-saving innovation followed close behind. It came in the form of blood plasma. Combat injuries frequently caused severe blood loss, sending casualties into shock long before surgeons could repair their wounds. During earlier wars, many soldiers died simply because there was no practical way to replace lost blood near the front. The United States solved that problem through one of the largest medical logistics programs in history. Across America, millions of civilians volunteered to donate blood through the American Red Cross. Scientists developed methods to separate and dry plasma so it could survive long ocean voyages without refrigeration. Packed into lightweight containers, these plasma kits accompanied invading troops across Europe and the Pacific. On the battlefield, medics could quickly mix sterile water with dried plasma, connect a simple intravenous tube, and begin restoring a casualty's blood volume even before evacuation. The effect was remarkable. Soldiers who might once have died from shock could now survive long enough to reach surgeons. Behind this achievement stood Dr. Charles Drew, whose pioneering work in blood preservation and large-scale collection transformed military medicine. His innovations created a system capable of supplying millions of units of plasma throughout the war, saving countless lives. Germany never developed a comparable nationwide plasma program. Although German physicians used fluids and occasional direct blood transfusions, they lacked the massive industrial network required to deliver ready-to-use plasma close to the front lines. Many wounded soldiers therefore reached medical stations in far more critical condition than their American counterparts. Then came another revolutionary advantage. Penicillin. Before antibiotics became widely available, battlefield infections posed one of the greatest threats to survival. Even wounds that initially appeared manageable could become life-threatening days later if bacteria spread through damaged tissue. Recognizing its potential, the United States launched an unprecedented partnership between government laboratories, universities, and private pharmaceutical companies. Rather than competing, researchers shared discoveries and production methods, allowing penicillin to be manufactured on an industrial scale. By the summer of 1944, millions of doses were available for Allied forces preparing for the invasion of Normandy. Doctors soon witnessed dramatic results. Serious wound infections became far less common. Limbs that might previously have required amputation could often be saved. Recovery rates improved, and thousands of soldiers returned home who, only a few years earlier, might not have survived. Germany possessed some of the world's finest chemists and pharmaceutical companies. It had pioneered numerous important medicines before the war. Yet despite repeated efforts, it never achieved large-scale penicillin production before the conflict ended. Instead, German doctors continued relying primarily on older sulfonamide drugs and traditional surgical methods, which were often less effective against severe infections. By 1944, the contrast between the two systems had become impossible to ignore. An American casualty often received morphine, wound treatment, plasma, antibiotics, and rapid evacuation through a carefully coordinated chain of care. A German casualty depended far more heavily on reaching a physician before complications developed. That difference explained far more than the silence witnessed by German doctors at Anzio. It revealed how modern medicine, industrial production, scientific cooperation, and battlefield organization had become as important to victory as tanks, artillery, or aircraft. The greatest advantage the United States possessed was not simply a better medicine. It was a complete medical system built to save lives from the very first minute after a soldier was wounded. The true lesson of this story was never about a single medicine or a single battlefield. It was about two armies that approached the same problem in fundamentally different ways. Both Germany and the United States possessed skilled doctors. Both had dedicated medics willing to risk their lives for wounded comrades. Both faced the same artillery, the same harsh weather, and the same devastating combat conditions. But when an infantryman fell on the battlefield, what happened next depended entirely on the system behind him. For an American soldier, the chain of survival often began within moments. A company aide-man rushed forward carrying morphine, sterile bandages, sulfa powder, and the training to use them under fire. The casualty was stabilized, evacuated through organized medical stations, supported with blood plasma if necessary, and eventually treated with advanced surgical care and, increasingly, penicillin. Every step was connected. Every minute mattered. The goal was simple: keep the wounded alive until they could return home. That philosophy changed battlefield medicine forever. By the end of the Second World War, the United States had reduced battlefield mortality to levels that would have seemed impossible only a generation earlier. Advances in rapid treatment, evacuation, antibiotics, and blood replacement transformed survival rates and became the foundation of modern military medicine. Many of those innovations remain part of emergency medicine today. Paramedics who arrive at traffic accidents, combat medics serving around the world, emergency physicians working in trauma centers, all operate within systems that trace part of their heritage back to lessons learned during the Second World War. The influence of those wartime decisions extends far beyond the battlefield. It continues to save lives every day. Yet perhaps the most powerful symbol of this story was not found in a laboratory or a hospital. It was found inside a small stone church in Normandy. On June 6, 1944, American medics Robert Wright and Kenneth Moore transformed the village church at Angoville-aux-Plaines into a temporary aid station. As fighting moved around them, they treated every wounded man brought through the doors. American. German. It made no difference. Their only rule was that weapons remained outside. Inside those walls, nationality disappeared. Every patient received the same medical care, the same attention, and the same dignity. That moment captured something larger than military medicine. Even in the middle of one of history's greatest conflicts, compassion still survived. Decades later, visitors can still walk into that church. Memorial windows honor the two medics, reminding everyone who enters that courage is measured not only by those who fight, but also by those who choose to save lives under impossible circumstances. History often remembers the generals, the tanks, and the great battles. But countless lives were preserved by quieter heroes. By the medic carrying a canvas bag instead of a rifle. By the nurse working through the night. By the scientist searching for a better antibiotic. By the factory worker producing medical supplies. By the civilian who rolled up a sleeve to donate blood for someone they would never meet. EE.UU became part of an invisible chain stretching from home front to front line. That is why the German doctors at Anzio struggled to explain what they saw. The calm they witnessed was not created by courage alone. It was the result of preparation, scientific innovation, industrial cooperation, disciplined logistics, and thousands of ordinary people working toward one extraordinary